It seems many people feel stuck in their corporate job. They're stuck in a place they don't necessarily have the passion for. They don't necessarily know what they want. And even worse, they're in an environment that's toxic. They have a boss that's bearing down on them. And we know what's going on in corporate America these days. They're looking for any reason to run you harder, run you longer, and pay you less. And that just seems to be the ongoing general consensus. I personally lived it. And I want to talk about the fact that in my job, I went from zero to hero almost virtually overnight. And I want to welcome Nick Papagiorgio, who's actually the latest member and the first member to Retiree as Me. Welcome back, Nick. And Nick had a long question that really is something that touched a lot of us, or touches a lot of us, and it really hits close to home. And Nick's concern was the fact that he's in one of these toxic job environments, very much like I was, and he didn't know what to do. He's not sure what to do. He's sort of got a bit of a plan going forward, but the fact is a toxic job is keeping him down, keeping him stressed out, and he's looking for something a little bit more where he can live his passions, his dreams. He wants to be a bit more of a consultant and possibly look at just doing something for himself. You know, obviously, when you run your own business, and I can adhere to that, when you run your own business, you're probably going to work twice as much, twice as hard. But it's a pet project, and it's something you live for. It's something you have a passion for. Welcome back to the hustle, everybody, and welcome back to the grind. Got the beverage in today. And let's talk about this. Again, welcome back to the membership program. Nick Papagiorgio actually had a wonderful question because it's something I lived. You know, I personally lived. He had a question about the LLC program. Does it make sense? How that looks if I'm running that? And ultimately, the LLC is something unique for the United States. In Canada, it doesn't work quite the same. It works the same, but it's called something different. An LLC is a limited liability company in the United States. Allows you to gain some of the benefits of corporation, but any kind of liabilities doesn't necessarily tag itself to the person, the individual themselves. So if there's a problem with the business, say you're a contractor or a tradesperson and something happens on a job you're working on, well, there's a limited liability that ties directly to the actual owner of the business. Rather, it stays with the company. And if the company doesn't have a lot of assets, you know, the limited liability means there's not a lot of stress and not a lot potentially to lose. Now, that said, I mean, you've always got to be careful, and we've always got to do our due diligence. And LLCs are a great way to sort of isolate an owner from, you know, the concerns that may erupt as that type of business. You know, some businesses are certainly a lot more volatile than others. In Canada, it's a little bit different. It's basically as soon as you incorporate or you become a corporation with a numbered business, you sort of take on some of those benefits as well. You gather the benefits from some of the taxation. Same with an LLC. You'll gain some of the personal taxation benefits there. You'll save some money there, usually at a much lower tax rate. And the other benefit, again, is just isolating yourself from some liability. Now, that said, again, the differentiation to be made, though, was LLC and corporations is a little bit different in the sense that you don't necessarily have free spending availability. And most of these, once you become a business, you almost have to think of it as two separate entities, business versus personal. And you can't necessarily just spend like you're going to grab $10 out of your pocket and just go buy a bunch of Slurpees. It has to make sense. It has to be related to the business in some way. So, you know, the spending and the scrutiny of that spending, you have to answer for it with your accountants and potentially if the government, the IRS or CRA come knocking. It has to be related in some way to your business. But outside of that, it does bring you into a better tax bracket and certainly isolates the liability. So it's a huge win. So yes, absolutely. I had to do something like that myself personally many years ago. The big reason for me was more related to getting into an environment that's a much lower tax bracket. I don't necessarily need the spending. And certainly when I was working for the big corporate job, see, that was one of those trigger moments for me. I was working for many years, and we all know that the struggles and the toxic environment that I was amidst, I was sharing that with you, each and every one of you, many, many times over. But have any of you seen that movie, Me, Myself, and Irene with Jim Carrey? You know, when he's in the grocery store and everybody's kicking him, everybody's treating him like crap his whole life. He's just that guy that's everybody crapping on and everybody's, you know, taking advantage of, you know, he's a police officer, single dad of a couple of kids, and everybody just treats him like crap. And quite often that's an environment that you feel like when you're in, a lot of times you're in these corporate games and these corporate worlds, you do feel isolated. You do feel like you're being crapped on. And while some people love that environment, some people love their jobs, and some people are truly in a what you call a performing stage in their career, just because you get a few different stages. You get, the norming coming out of the storming. So you typically, when there's a major change, storming is the environment. Major bosses, major reshuffle, major layoffs, all those things. Now you're going through a storming change. There's insecurity, there's all kinds of chaos, crap, and corruption. Then you go into, it stabilizes, settles down, and it goes to a norming phase. And these are all typical attributes of the corporate game. And quite often they leave us feeling very unstable, very volatile, very insecure. And so then you hit the norming stage where everything starts to sort of level out and everybody just starts to figure it out again. Not much has changed for a bit. So then they're normalizing the environment. And then once you start to really catch your legs and your wind, then all of a sudden you get into what they call a performing stage. And, the performing stage doesn't seem to last very long. The organizations seem to love that because they're getting the most out of their workers. But the problem is there's always a new worker coming. There's a new manager, a new boss that comes in that somehow knows more than the previous. Once that happens, you're back in the storming stage again. And these are those environments that rattle a cage. And these are the environments that often leave a lot of us, like Nick Papagiorgio, in environments where, we're not feeling very happy about our workplace. We're not feeling good about some of the coworkers, or maybe our boss, or maybe it's the workload or whatever, or if it's the lack of work-life balance, quite often is impacted. But you know what? I was feeling like that. I was feeling like a zero for years as I was starting to get pushed to the corner, because quite often we know what these corporate jobs are all about. We know what this whole workspace is all about these days. It's about, as you get older, they see less value. They start to create environments that you are no longer relevant. They rewrite your job profile, that some of the skills you may no longer be relevant on. And then that just pushes you to a place where you have to almost fight and battle for a job that you were doing quite well, merely a couple of years ago. So they're really doing their part to change the game every single year, every single week. It seems sometimes every single month. Change the game to keep you on your toes, keep you less relevant, and certainly provide them the benefit of bringing in lower cost help. So it's unfortunate, but this is the world we're in, and that's why I wanted none of it. That's why I went from a zero. That's why I went to a hero. Now, I'm not saying a hero. I'm not Superman. What I am saying is, in my own world, in my own sphere of influence, family, my own personal life, my own mental state, I went to a hero because I needed something changed. And sure, while they made the decision for me to leave, that doesn't matter as much when you consider the fact that I'm not going back. And so that's the bigger decision. I'm out. I'm done. And so that's what a lot of people are making that conscious effort now to say, look, there's better things in this world. And that's what I did. Nick asked me the question, how did I transition? Well, my transition plan was really one which 10 years back, I think, where it was probably, I would say 8 years prior to leaving the company, I was starting the YouTube channel. Now, initially it didn't start as a plan to leave. It wasn't the exit plan. It wasn't the evacuation route. But rather it started as a pet project. But got 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in, all of a sudden there's a little bit of cash starts to trickle in. And it doesn't matter if it's side hustle, YouTube, doesn't matter if you've got a consulting gig, if you can work it on the side. Now, Nick also commented that social media is an environment that he wants to expand on once he starts his business. And I would agree with that 100%. These days, social media, if you're not in a presence there, nobody knows who you are. That said, tread cautiously. Here's my experience. I am social media, obviously, YouTube channel, and that, in my own personal opinion, bit me in the rump. Now, you see, if you're currently working for a corporate environment, you do not want to tell anybody any of your plans. I do not care. Nick, straight up, and I mean this sincerely, and anybody who's watching this video, if you're thinking about transitioning out, which I was, and honestly, I pray for you and I wish you all the best, because it is truly one of the best things you can do for your own mental state, physical state, and certainly your own feeling of independence, is make that transition to something that you feel more passionate about. But the last thing you want to do is share any of your news with anybody at work. I don't care how close, how good of a friend you think they are. As soon as somebody catches wind that you're doing something, you got something on the brew, Trust me, I can't tell you how many times I thought I knew somebody in my space only to find it slap me in the face later on. They do not want your best interests. They do not have your best interests at heart. Rather, they'd see you fail. And seeing you fail just makes people feel a lot better. It's bringing you down to their level. You know, that level of misery, sitting in the pit of despair with the snakes and ladders? No, I climbed out of that ladder. I'm not going back. But you definitely do not want to share any of that with any of your coworkers, and that's been my own personal experience. See, while you need social media to sort of build up your business, for me, my unfortunate reality was I was social media, and I had numerous bosses previous. Mark, you may want to dial that down. You may want to shut it off. People are watching, and people don't like that. Just the fact that you're doing something that you want to do, even though it's outside in your time, they just see that somehow has a negative impact, and it may have an influence on the outsiders looking in, thinking that somehow you and that business is affiliated to whatever you're talking about online. We've heard this story time and time again. We've seen this all over social media. I was watching a video yesterday by a gentleman who was chatting about sharing some stories about a husband and wife situation. We were revealing a lot of issues that they're finding in society, well, basically in society in Canada here. Once their employers found out what they were doing, they were basically given the cease. And cease, otherwise you'll lose your job. Well, guess what? They lost your jobs. And so social media is a wonderful thing, but be careful what you say because it can last forever. So if you're looking to promote a business, absolutely, that's a great way to do it. But again, as I say, just be careful in your transition plan on some of your social media, because what I've found is quite often a lot of the companies simply do not want to see that, don't want to know that you're doing that. If they know that you're visible in that capacity, then they know that anybody else can see what you're doing. And honestly, it reveals everything. So until you're really ready to jump off and say, you know, this is the plan, then some of that you might want to keep those details to yourself, because telling anybody, any of your coworkers, even if they're so-called friends, will almost guaranteed shoot you in the foot. Now, that said, you know what? Working in that environment, and how did I transition? My transition was a little bit more obvious because people saw it coming. Everybody sort of knew what I was doing. It was obvious, it was visible, it was on the screen, and it wasn't much to just pull up a video and see me kind of doing my part. Now, I was keeping everything 100% above board, but that doesn't matter. People are you're visible in that space. So my transition plan was really one to keep things a little bit slightly lower key. I never wanted to talk about anything at work. And that's definitely something you want to keep any of your business. If you're starting a business, is keep that out of the workplace that you're in today. If you want to slowly transition out with as little problem as possible, keep everything on the hush-hush and down low, because otherwise that can and will be exposed and may potentially be held against you later on. Now, of course, you want to do it on your terms. Again, keep it to yourself. Get that LLC. It does protect you in many ways, of course, in the tax implications. And so ultimately, yeah, Nick, great choice. And I can't tell you, this transition out of the workplace has been one that was a little rocky for me. But now that I sort of jumped out and I'm flailing in the ocean by myself, it was scary at first, but let me tell you, it is so rewarding at the end of the day. Are you going to work harder than you work at your full-time job? There's a good possibility. If you want to succeed in your business, and that's what I found, I had to double down, work twice as hard, you know, with the business, with the side hustle. That side hustle became something that I took on much more, I guess you could say aggressively, if you will, because now I was, you know, sort of flailing, if you will, but in a good way. So ultimately, you're going to find yourself busier, and my transition plan meant that once I jumped off that ship on whatever the date, that was February 28th of 2024, that things really got hectic. I had to really know what I was up against, because I didn't have the comfort in the ability to do it on my terms. And so my transition plan was one that just over the course of the last few years was one of, you know, I was down in the dumpers. My mental state wasn't good. The isolations wasn't good. You know, the way, in my opinion, the way I was getting treated wasn't great. Isolated, get from the, you know, the rest of the group. And I think everything, when you talk about textbook, I'll share this as time goes on, but when you talk about textbook telltale signs that you're about to get turfed, I saw all of it. In retrospect, it all makes sense. I see all these employment gurus and wizards talk about all of the telltale signs, and I lived it. So we'll talk about that another day, but the idea was to build the business in a way that was profitable enough that you could sustain on your own by walking away. That's when you walk away. When you realize that you could pretty much now replace or even replace half, because remember, you're probably going to start building it up. So if you're at a place where you can pretty much make your payments, your monthly costs, maybe you start building that business on the side. And if you start, bringing in a little bit of clientele, you start working it. Honestly, that becomes a situation where you have to ask yourself, is it time? Now, that said, a word of caution, as you transition, depending on the line of work, and you mentioned consulting, and a lot of people are thinking about transitioning out of their workplace, you've got to be cautious, because a lot of companies have these conflict of interests. You sign off on a lot of this. And a lot of times people get into a line of work that's directly related to what they were doing. If that's the case, there may be something that they may want to come after you. So the old gag orders could be real. So definitely you want to be careful about that. My line of work had nothing to do with my external employment or external work. And so it really didn't have an impact. But for many people it does. It's a skill set you've learned over years and you just maybe want to do it yourself. That can have an impact. So a word to the wise. If you're doing something similar, sometimes they claim what you develop even after your employment becomes their property, because they think you developed ideas on their watch. And that's some dirty pool that some of them play, but that's the game, and you just have to make sure that you know what you signed off on. So Nick, when I say I went from zero to hero, I truly mean it. And if the question is asked, would you do it all over again? 250%. Was it hard work? Was it scary? Yes. But it was totally worth it. And so here I am, having a walk and chat with each and every one of you, loving life way more than I ever did. Anyway, please, if you want to join the membership program like Nick did, down below you can do so. And as well, just don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. See you then. Bye-bye.